Welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 31, Episode 13. Coming up on this show, we've got the Sasquatch mimics, the red-haired, big-brained gods, and biohacking your skull. I'm your host, Benjamin Grundy. Joining me is Aaron Wright.
It's never a good idea at all to start messing with your skull.
What if you just a little hole, just a little 6 mil hole?
I knew this is where we're going. We're going for trepanning, aren't we? And drilling holes in your skull.
Yes, we're going to be trepanning ourselves live on the show.
I'm not taking LSD. I mean, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, there is this weird connection between LSD and the modern, drive to drill a hole in your head.
You know what? I found it only recently. It was kind of like an inner circle party thing that was done in the 60s. It was like you would go to a party, you'd take LSD, and then you'd do skull trepanning. And I'm like, are you serious?
I don't know if it was that casual. I mean, it's pretty
Just
full
for
on.
fun.
It's pretty full on. But there is this link between those early pioneers of self-trepanning, literally drilling a hole into your skull to enhance your psychic energy. There's a link between them and the early LSD scene in Europe. So I'll be going into that. There's a brand new issue of New Dawn, one of their special issues. Our good friends over there have released volume 18, number 2. There's an article from Lee Parkey, who's an author in Queensland, actually. She writes for one of the local UFO magazines.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Really fantastic writer, and she's got this new one on ancient biohacking. So she actually links this trepanning, and there's many ancient skulls that show evidence of trepanning, drilling into the skull.
Mm-hmm. But wasn't that in the past believed to be more about like if people were suffering from some sort of schizophrenia and that they'd release a demon or they'd release the spirit that was in there?
We'll get into that. There's all sorts of explanations, and initially it was thought that this wouldn't be possible for Neolithic peoples to be able to drill a hole in the head.
Well, not only that, though, isn't it from some of the really early skulls, like the type of hole that's been drilled is very precise. And so people wonder how is it possible that they were able to drill something with such precision?
Well, the initial theory was that they would scrape a hole in the skull with a shark's tooth or something similar.
Mm-hmm.
And you just got to stop and think about it. All right. How long is that going to take to scrape through bone? Not even if it's your own head, like you just had a bone in front of you and you try and scrape through it with a shark tooth. It's going to take like 8 hours.
Well,
you're going to have to take breaks, give your wrist a rest. And we're meant to believe that these ancient cavemen are just like,
well, that's the thing.
Scraping a hole in their head.
You have to even wonder, where is it that someone was walking along, a Neolithic person was walking along a beach, they happened to see a baked shark there, and I'm like, oh, okay, let me pull out a tooth, and then I'll take that over to my mate, and I'll start scraping at his skull.
I know what to do with this. Put a hole in my head.
See, that's why I've always thought about the trepanning with these LSD parties. And you're right, it's not as extreme as that. But I always wonder did they get that idea? Was that from the entities they met on LSD?
It's an interesting idea because some of the early people that did it, there's a Dutch guy named Bart Hughes, and he was involved in some of those very early LSD experiments in the 1960s in Europe. And he actually reported that the doctors that administered the drugs to him turned into demons in front of him. One of them turned into a pig, but the rest turned into Satan or something. And other people in the study said that the doctors turned into demons.
Is that normal for LSD? Is it kind of like suggestive?
Well, I don't know if it's normal to go on and drill a hole in your head, which is what he did.
Yeah. Yeah, that probably does have something demonic attached to it. So I'm not surprised that that's what he saw.
What have you got coming up?
Well, we're going to go to the B side of Bigfoot encounters, of Sasquatch encounters. Not in B's, as in, you've got an old cassette. Oh, I'm too old now. Like a cassette tape, okay? You're on A side, now we're going to go to the B side. What I actually am referring to is, thank you very much. You should know, you're a former musician.
Okay, Grandpa.
So we were going into...
Get out the laser disc. We're doing the laser disc side A first and then laser disc side B.
I did that the other day. I happened to mention to my son that I had, I had this movie on DVD, and he's just like a Terminator, just staring at me.
What is that?
He had no idea. And I'm like, oh, yeah, of course he's never seen one. No, we're going to go into this. The BFRO, the Bigfoot Research Organization, has a classification system essentially for encounters that people have.
The Bigfoot Research Organization.
Yeah. So they fall into two classifications. They fall into obviously type A and class B. And class B encounters happen to be highlighted in a book called The Forest Poltergeist, Class B Encounters and the Paranormal. This is by W.T. Watson. And we've looked into some of his books in the past. He's not a huge fan of us, but that's not going to stop me from going into his stuff.
Doesn't he always reference our articles and never names us?
Never.
He just says an internet website.
Everything else he's been on, every other person he's worked with, He mentions them name, no worries. Anytime he's like, oh, this person, Brent Swanser from internet website.
It's like he begrudgingly has to put us in his books, but he thinks we're white supremacists or something, so he doesn't want to name us.
Look, you did call his wife a tranny, so that's probably why.
Did we?
No, we didn't. I'm just joking.
I'm sure his wife is quite lovely. I would never say such a thing.
No, I take it back. But we are going to go into his accounts because he actually highlights some really intriguing hypothetical situations that could be occurring. Obviously, we're going to be looking at the idea that a lot of these encounters that people have with Bigfoot in the forest, in bushland settings, in the wilderness, are not Bigfoot encounters at all. They're actually poltergeist or some form of energy. And I've always been like, I don't really buy that. His book has definitely got me thinking.
Really?
Yeah, and it's changed my opinion just slightly on it, where I think he might actually be onto something. So we'll go into that later on at the end of the show, but let's jump into trepanning. Not us personally.
Well, it doesn't quite go into trepanning at first. This is the new issue, volume 18, number 2. I'll link to New Dawn in the show notes. I think it's just newdawn.com. Right? That's their website, right?
This is terrible. I should know that.
There's an excellent article from Bibu. This is an article
newdawnmagazine.com.
Thanks. We'll put that in the show notes. The mysterious hybrid creatures depicted on the black obelisk of Shalmaneser. Remember, we covered this on a Plus episode a few months back. This is one of Bibu's excellent articles. So this was featured in the magazine, which he goes into this.
Oh, yes.
Remember this obelisk, and it depicts these strange hybrid creatures. They're like half monkey, half men.
Mm.
And Bibu goes into the history of some of that kind of discussion on, like monkey creatures in the Hindu texts. Remember, we spoke about Rama's bridge?
That's right, yeah.
So I'll link to the Plus episode where we speak about that article as well, but it was good to see that in there. But the article I wanted to talk about today, again, this is from Lee Parkey. Ancient extreme biohacking. Is deforming your skull and drilling a hole in it the key to higher consciousness?
Yeah, this is the Conehead stuff that's popped up. And where these skulls, like these apparent deformed skulls that have an alien-like look to them, this falls in with a lot of the research that's been done into giants as well. When there's been alleged giant skulls the skulls of giants that have been recovered, they've got these elongated skulls. But some have suggested that it's a result of being a different species, but obviously in this circumstance, it's just simply some type of compression bandage at birth?
Well, it depends. I think Parkey argues that many of the skulls, well, not many, some of the skulls that have been found that are elongated aren't just from artificial elongation, where they've either bounded or compressed the skull when it was a child.
Yeah.
And the specific case she starts with is the Paracas skulls. These were found in Peru in 1929. There was a burial ground. It was excavated and they found, I think it was about 300 skeletons. They all had these elongated skulls and they've done recreations. I'll put one on the screen here. You can see on the right there, that's the modern recreation. But they're very strange looking skulls, aren't they? And this is, of course, this has been debated for ever since the discovery, and you've heard all sorts of explanations over the years, aliens being one of them. But what we do know is that it wasn't just like one or two of them. There was 300. They're all different genders. They're all quite tall, and they different ages as well. So there were younger people with these elongated skulls, and a lot of them had red hair.
That's where it ties in with the giants, the red-headed giants.
Yeah, and I've been reading a little bit about that in recent days in regards to how the hair can turn red without the person actually having red hair during their life. And part of it has to do with the decomposition of the body. There's an argument that the decomposition fluids can actually dye the hair, which is why it ends up that red color. But that's just one opinion I read. It's still up for debate.
How is it possible that the hair has managed to survive? Is it because of have they fallen into a bog or something?
I don't know. No idea.
It must be something to do with the soil.
Well, we've heard about the redhead giants supposedly discovered in New Zealand as well. But typically they just go, whew.
That's right. Yeah, they turn to powder like an Indiana Jones film.
When you dig them out of the ground, they just disappear. Tons of debate over these skulls over the years. But Parkey says they're now generally considered to be artificial deformation. These skulls, so they're not. Yeah, it's not a genetic thing. But recent DNA testing does seem to indicate that they were unique people. So I brought up this 2018 study, it was led by Brian Forster and L.A. Marzulli. So they're on the fringe, obviously. They're fringe researchers. But they presented DNA findings on the elongated skulls at a symposium in L.A. Forster said the DNA results were incredibly complicated. He said what it does show for sure is that the Paracas elongated skull people were not 100% Native American. And this is what was interesting about it, is that they seemed to be like a hybrid of people from Eastern Europe. They had that DNA, and also Western Asia. So one of the possibilities is that they were simply another form of, not hominid, but human beings. And we've got to remind ourselves that the only reason we know about Denisovans, for example, is that little jaw bone and a knuckle.
But wouldn't genetic testing reveal that there would be a deviance from Homo sapiens sapien?
I'm not sure, but their conclusion is that there was some kind of subspecies of humanity. He said there seems to be a lot of DNA evidence from extreme Eastern Europe and extreme Western Asia. He said more specifically, I'm talking about the area in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. So that also brings up this interesting idea of the migration route they would have taken in ancient times. So there's more to it than just a bunch of natives tied up their heads, and it was a cultural thing. But in regards to the skull shape, Parkey says that a human skull that is elongated after birth displays flattening of both the forehead and the back of the head. And the skull volume doesn't change. But apparently with these skulls, they're different. They're larger than an artificially elongated skull, and they have a larger internal volume, which has led some to say they've got big brain energy. They would have had bigger brains, or a bigger cavity at least. But others, it's funny.
That doesn't necessarily mean that you're brighter, though.
Well, you read up on this, and other people cite statistics where they say, look, you can run all the measurements on elongated skulls in the world, and the cavity size is virtually the same. It doesn't increase the size that your brain can fill out the skull. She said, in addition, the skull morphology is different, though. The skull is not flattened, and there's physiological differences between typical elongated skulls and some of these skulls. And she talks about the different parts and how they're slightly different.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're alien. That doesn't mean they're some kind of freak from another planet.
Well, again, the DNA analysis would reveal, if they were alien, that you would have, rogue sequences in there that we simply can't, identify. I mean, yeah, there's obviously junk DNA, but surely something would stand out.
Well, the thing that makes it interesting is that how widespread this practice was across the world. The next example she gives is Lord Pakal. And we all know Lord Pakal from Eric von Daniken, who has gone on endlessly about this famous tomb carving, where many people have interpreted this, or von Daniken has, that he's in some kind of spaceship. This is the famous tomb of Lord Pakal, who ruled between 603 and 683 CE.
And he can drive it by snorting something.
Yeah, he's got like some kind of nose device. Like Christopher Reeves in a wheelchair. He just steers it with his nose. His tomb was discovered in 1948, but Eric von Daniken made it famous.
Where is this? What part of the world are we in?
This is in, where is this? Mayan, the Mayan city. Okay. So that's Mexico. Verbal reports from the time of the excavation stated that the skeleton was tall and had an elongated skull. Now, there's a whole cover-up conspiracy behind his actual remains. And it's said that, like, there's photos of his sarcophagus and there's photos of the skeleton, but in every photo, it's angled in such a way so that his skull is completely encased in shadow.
Really?
You can't see it. But according to her and other researchers I've read, and I couldn't find any quotes, but they say that people in the excavation remarked how large and elongated his skull was. In support of the unusual size and appearance of his skull, she says the Mayan legends recount that he was a god and a giant monster. The words of the South American god Viracocha also come to mind, she says, when he said, "If ever my subjects were to see me, they would run away." Maybe he's just hideous, just horrifically ugly. But also tied into this is the Red Queen. She says hidden in a pyramid beside Pakal's tomb were the remains of the Red Queen. She was discovered fairly recently in 1994 in this pyramid here. And there's an image of her skull in the public domain, which is, I think it's that one there, or is it this one? That's a better example. And it does look elongated.
It does.
It does look stretched out.
Yeah.
It does look obviously bigger.
Well, it's not consistent, right? Obviously the skull is damaged, but it's not consistent with what appears to be, any type of, I don't know, you're right. There's no marks on it that would indicate wrapping or compression or anything like that.
Yeah. And the Palenque Pacal's tomb was actually sealed up because they were protesting back in 1977, and that's part of the conspiracy.
Because they hired protesters.
Well, no, that they argue that his remains were sealed away, and then when it was opened again, the skull had been switched or something. There's all sorts of crazy conspiracies out there surrounding it. I don't know why you would cover up him having an elongated skull when so many other elongated skulls are seen across the world.
Unless it forms like it's the linchpin for kind of confirming everything, or maybe there was something in there that would have told us everything.
I mean, you just look at the art. Look at the guy's head.
Obvious.
Like, you look at the Mayan art, which was everywhere, and clearly he had an elongated skull. And I just love these recreations that they've done.
That's cool.
See, this one looks it looks real, and it's not. It's not even a render. It's like a bust they've made.
Mm-hmm.
But this one's intriguing because you can see the trepanation hole.
Oh.
I don't know if that's on purpose, but there's a clear circular dent on the top of this guy's skull. And he's got the aquiline nose and everything. He looks very similar to those depictions of the ancient god king.
Very similar.
So, yeah, this is where it gets interesting. This is a global phenomenon. These elongated skulls show up all over the world. You've got the Peruvian ones we just showed, obviously. And then you get into the Egyptian nobility. So this is one of Akhenaten's daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very familiar with that that visual image of the Egyptian headdress as well, that sweeping back headgear that is depicted on the walls. And then you've got the North Americans as well. You've got the Native Americans. That's a Chinook skull.
Just bring this one up. It hasn't come up.
And, yeah, it's clearly elongated. You can also see there's sketches of how they would do it too. So this is a Chinook sketch of a woman with her baby. Bro, look at this guy's face.
Those poor kids. Look, I know it's a cultural thing, but
he's like, Mum, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I know this is necessary.
It's like what happened with, remember with the binding of women's feet in China? And you'd see these poor women, their feet would be bound because it used to be that women's feet, the smaller they were, the more attractive they were.
It used to be.
Well, I don't know what their culture is now. I certainly hope that they've stopped the practice.
Like, you don't find it attractive?
Not to...
Like the little...
Yeah, it's like little claws. Like, it's just terrifying. But there's poor kids. Like, there were kids that were subjected to that.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. It's pretty brutal. This is the African one as well. This is one of the tribes from the Congo. And that's really pronounced. Like, you can really see that skull shape being changed, obviously. This is the Mangbetu tribe in the Congo.
What was that from? Was it from a similar apparatus? Or did
they use rope to bind the infant's head, and they just get it tighter and tighter and tighter. Apparently still practiced today. And then China as well. This is one of the Chinese gods. He's considered the god of immortality and longevity. And there's various different versions. And it's almost like as you go through various parts of Asia, his head gets bigger and bigger.
Oh, yes.
Until he gets to his final form, which is David Wilcock.
Stop.
Sorry.
I've decided we're going to try and be nicer this year. We'll try.
No, you just called some guy's wife a tranny in the first 30 seconds.
I said we may have.
Implied. Well, I guess you implied that was what we were like in the past, but we have turned a new leaf.
We've definitely turned a new leaf.
So this is an example of David Wilcock, who does not have an elongated skull. He has an elongated forehead. There's apparently some Australian Aboriginal examples as well. But either way, I mean, the point of her showing all these is that it's undeniable that it was a worldwide, widespread practice. Yeah. Paki argues that there also appears to be individuals that were born with these elongated skulls. And there's no evidence that they went through the compression at all. There just seemed to be a different people. There was a different genetic line that had this particular feature. So her understanding from the research is that there were two groups. There were people born with these elongated skulls, and there were people that tried to emulate the people with elongated skulls.
Oh, I see. And so the people that were born with the elongated skulls must have had certain properties that were revered by the culture, so they attempted to emulate that.
Precisely. I mean, that's the question that comes to mind is
can you just get rid of that for me, please? I can't have David
Sorry.
Wilcock staring at me.
Well, no one else can see it. It's
Yeah,
just
Mike.
for you. Yeah, the question is why? Like, why would you put your child through that especially? Because it's not an easy procedure, and if you damage it, you get a damaged child. One idea is that they wanted to emulate royalty. So according to a Spanish account from the 16th century, the Mayans informed the Spaniards that they elongated their heads because they said our ancestors were told by the gods that if our heads were thus formed, we should appear noble.
Okay.
So again, this tying into royalty, to the leaders, to the gods. So emulating royalty could be a reason, but this doesn't explain how or why the godlike personages being imitated came by their elongated heads in the first place. Like, where did these people come from? Why were they the kings? Why were they royalty? Was it something to do with the elongated head? Did that give them the ability to rule? So there's something interesting about that. And again, there's modern examples where this still goes on. So yeah, this is going back to the Chinooks. That's still another modern example. And again, bro, this poor kid.
How long would they have to keep their kids like that?
Just
as well?
years, right? It must be through your teens when all of that, I guess, well,
no, your cranium.
because it all seals up pretty quickly, doesn't it? Like a couple of
6
years?
months? No. I don't actually know, but I thought it was reasonably early.
Right.
Maybe you're right. Maybe it is a couple of years.
Here's some examples from Vanuatu, and they use the identical method to the ones in the Congo.
Right.
And I've got some more modern examples. Surprisingly, the Basque do it as well. So the guy on the left there, he's from the Basque region, which is in the Pyrenees and France and Spain. And the woman on the right is another one from the Congo. But she's arguing that this also brings up questions of contact in the ancient world. Like, is it just another example of people in the ancient world who weren't necessarily as isolated as we first believed? Because Vanuatu, I mean, this is in the Pacific. It's meant to be isolated islands. Why would they have a practice that's identical to what they do in Africa?
Mm.
So this suggests that there was some kind of not unified, but there was certainly more contact in the ancient past than we may believe. There would be trade routes, but also cultures and beliefs and customs and different ways of doing things would have passed through these trade routes. My favorite modern example is Queen Rosalie of Rwanda. Have you seen this woman?
No, I don't believe so.
Unfortunately, she was assassinated in 1994, but she's just so striking. She's a
very striking,
beautiful woman. And they argue that because she was royalty, right? She had this elongated head. I'm not too sure though, because going through the images of her here, if you're listening to the audio, just Google Queen Rosalie of Rwanda.
Oh, there's a bit of a before and after effect happening here.
Well, no, these are just different angles, but I think 90% of it is her hairstyle.
Right.
Like, she had this special hairstyle where they just shaped it back so that it grew like a cone head. But even that, this comes from a tradition. This comes from an ancient way of doing things, an ancient way of portraying the rulers, the royalty, or perhaps even the gods. The interesting thing about her husband, this was the king, what's his name? King Mutara III, Rudigwa. Look how big he was.
I have to say, he's a big guy.
He's huge. It's like an NBA player walking amongst the referees or something. He's absolutely giant. Looks at least 7 foot in that photo. So yeah, that's my favorite modern example. And again, it just shows this connection going back to this idea of leaders, royalty, the gods.
And hence people wanting to emulate that.
Yeah, having these long elongated skulls. So again, why would all these people from all these cultures do this? Because it is dangerous. Again, if you have a child and you try and modify their skull, you can potentially damage the frontal lobe. And then you're in big trouble because that's like
impulse control,
inhibition, mood and violence and all that sort of stuff. So she says, given that artificial skull elongation can only be undertaken in the first few months of life, it begs the question, why would they do this? But is it possible, she asks, that some kind of change to the frontal lobe is brought about by skull elongation, but with entirely unexpected outcomes? So they are doing something to the brain through this practice. And
Well, also, I'm not too sure how much it would change it, but the parietal lobe surely would be adjusted as well. And isn't it Persinger that was suggesting that if you fire a magnetic pulse into the parietal lobe, that it causes, like, not hallucinogenic, but godlike experiences?
well, Parkey says there's a brand new study. There's recent research. It was done in 2023, this research paper. It reported evidence of increased psi ability in individuals with damage or mutation to the frontal regions of the brain.
So what, you can look at someone and your brain kind of pulses and then a cup comes flying across the room at you?
The experiments they did were random number generators.
Oh, okay.
So they're the ones they use for the Global Consciousness Project. They're just black boxes that are producing random ones and zeros. And the study participants, from what I read today, they would try and move an arrow on a screen by manipulating the random number generation in these boxes, which was attached to the mouse cursor.
So are these people that have suffered from some type of frontal lobe injury, or are they?
No, these were volunteers who went through reversible frontal lobe modifications.
What?
That's what it says in the study. So this could just be pressure on the brain, right?
Yeah.
Enough pressure to slightly modify the frontal lobe.
Not a lobotomy.
And well, you would hope not. I did look up the study today. I think I've got it in my browser here. I mean, it's a legit study. From what I saw, they had, I think, up to 300 participants in the study. Do I have it here or did I delete it? I might have deleted it. I'll put it in the show notes. Oh, no, here it is. I found it. Oh, I'm not even sharing my screen. I'm an idiot. Let me bring it up. But she's arguing that there's this new evidence now that shows that this is science. I don't know.
So RTMS. So yeah, it is like those terrible electronic devices that you strap to your skull and it fires stuff into your head.
Yeah, so I guess they've juiced it up enough that they say it's reversible. So those TMS machines.
I'm about to say, it's saying something for those machines if you could actually inhibit someone's frontal lobe activity.
And they make you psychic. They said they saw increased psi ability, and specifically in the Brodmann areas, which I've got highlighted on the screen here, which is 9, 10, and 32. They would through this experiment, they would experience direct pressure on those regions, and they had increased psi ability.
You know what though? It's one thing having them behaving in this way while they're in a lab setting, but anytime you see someone with a frontal lobe injury. So I've known people that have been in motorcycle accidents, been kicked in the head by a horse. I know a lot of people with frontal lobe injuries, but they've got huge problems with anger, because once that frontal lobe is switched off, it's like, it's all gone. And I've never seen any of them be psychic.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously that's what she's saying with the risk of doing that with the infant. And surely ancient people would be aware of that risk because there would be instances where they would get it wrong and they would damage the frontal lobe completely in the child.
Yeah.
And you would get a damaged human being.
So are they suggesting...
But they persisted with the practice. So is it more than just some kind of cultural mimicry of the gods or the kings or royalty? Is it more than just some kind of status symbol of having a big, like, sexy-shaped head?
That's probably more of a question for a sociologist, really, because, I mean, people do some pretty crazy and stupid things and dangerous things in the name of following a trend or, keeping up with society. So I think people could potentially do that.
Well, again, going back to that study, they said they saw increased psychokinetic ability. These people that had the modification could move the mouse on the screen with their minds. These same researchers have suggested that our nervous system, she says, may have evolved to inhibit psi, to prevent exposure to constant bombardment with irrelevant stimuli from telepathy, precognition, and clairvoyance that might divert attention away from environmental events threatening survival.
Yeah,
Because
that makes sense.
That's the argument with how the blood in the brain works. It's going to the areas that favor sight and movement and speech, and that's what's made us what we are today.
Well, also, only recently we were talking about people taking DMT, and once they've kind of crossed that threshold, they're no longer in this reality. It's like they can't function as a normal member of society. They end up being a hobo. It would be kind of the same thing here, right? If you're half in the spirit world because your brain is tapping into something, you're not going to be able to outrun that tiger that's coming after you.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they're arguing. And she questions, Lee says, is it possible that the flattening of the forehead during artificial skull elongation does indeed impact the frontal lobes, not enough to damage its functioning, but just enough to subtly alter the mid-frontal cortex and accentuate or bring about psi abilities.
Do you know what this is? Once again, we head back to the 90s. This is the equivalent of your brain being like those bunny ears on a TV and you just slightly adjusting them so you can get a different channel. That's what this is. You're just squishing the brain a little bit. You're adjusting the antenna.
Yeah. And there's evidence that they did this for thousands and thousands of years because you're going back to the Neolithic age.
Yeah.
And, it would have been something that would have been mastered. And this is where trepanation comes in because you have this other interesting trend with skulls around the world where many of them have been found with holes in them. You can see all these on the screen here, all these trepanned skulls. Trepanation is just putting a hole in your head.
I've got to look it up. Did Ötzi also have a hole in his skull when he was found?
Oh, the Iceman.
Yeah.
I think he did. Yeah, I think you're right from memory. But some of these skulls are, over 10,000 years old. The only use for skull
no, that was because he suffered a head blow. Hang on.
Oh, yeah, right. He was killed.
So that's what. But I think
he got an axe in the head.
No, but I think there was something else to it because he was a shaman. He was believed to be a shaman, and I seem to recall that there was something else going on.
Maybe it was a bit of conjecture where they said that's how he died.
Maybe that's why.
But then other people said no, he had this trepanation procedure. See, today the use of trepanation, it happens all the time because it's a medical procedure. So anytime there's an operation on the brain, obviously medical professionals need to trepan the skull. But the practice has been pretty much consistent throughout history. And putting a hole in your head is surprisingly difficult. I mean, you wouldn't think so. It's apparently very difficult. Not an easy process because you got the skin and the muscle covering the head. It's got to be cut to expose the skull, and then a portion of the skull has to be removed. So you can't just smash it in. The skull has to be
removed,
taken out. In addition, the practitioner needs to have an intimate understanding of the cerebral pressure and have infection control, and has to perform the trepanation without damaging nerves, blood vessels, or the 3 layers surrounding the brain itself. And it has been suggested that in prehistoric times, the technique used for trepanation was scraping with stones or shark teeth, as I said earlier. These experiments have shown that these implements were actually incapable of cutting with regularity and precision. It just doesn't make sense that they could have done that. The reason this was suggested is because the idea that ancient people had the skill and the tools and the knowledge to do this was considered blasphemy.
Of course it was.
It was just a completely crazy idea. But from a survey of prehistorically trepanned skulls with signs of bone regrowth, they've pretty much figured out that the survival rate was as high as 90% in the past.
Okay. But 90%, okay, so 1 in 10 people were dying from that.
Yes, but put this into perspective. When they started to try and bring this back into Western medicine, the survival rate was 10%.
Really? So the reverse.
And that's why trepanation disappeared for a long time. It only came back in recent times.
Why would they bring it back?
For brain surgery.
Oh, for releasing pressure on the brain.
Well, whenever you want to operate on the brain, you need to trepan. But when the Western doctors were still trying to do it, it's like in the 1700s, 1800s, it was like abysmal
was that
survival
because of infections?
Rate. Infections, and I'm not sure all the reasons why. But that's also part of the reason why when these skulls were discovered, the experts were like, okay, well, it's not possible that these people survived. These are just injuries, or it's some kind of cult thing and they're sacrifices.
Yeah, but some of those holes are quite precise.
Yeah, like they've been drilled by some kind of machinery.
Than, like an impact of some kind.
Yeah. In some parts of the world, she says, trepanation continued to be practiced until medieval times. So she says it was that pathetic survival rate in 19th century Western practitioners that caused the archaeologists to think, no, this isn't possible. But again, there's evidence that this practice was done during Paleolithic and Neolithic eras and was widespread across the globe. And she mentions North and Central South America have all these trepanned skulls like we've got on the screen there. They've also been found in Africa and Asia and in the Southern Hemisphere, Melanesia, Micronesia, Tahiti, New Caledonia, New Zealand.
So it's a global phenomenon.
All over the place, people were putting holes in their skulls. And yeah, some of the suggestions have been, okay, well, they were letting demons out.
Yeah.
Like these ancient people didn't know what they were doing. They were letting demons out. Or maybe they were actually operating on people. One of the things that debunked the idea that they were scraping with stones and sharks' teeth was that in many of the finds where they've dug up a skeleton and they've found a trepanned skull, the person had a amulet around their neck. And the amulet was of the piece of skull that had been removed.
Mm.
So that further goes to point out that they were using it as a kind of talisman.
Yeah.
If you're wearing it around your neck as some kind of protective talisman, they believed it had some kind of power to it, or the procedure itself had some kind of power to it. It is the accepted wisdom that trepanation, she said, was performed for medical reasons. So they say, epilepsy, bad behavior, mental illness. And the problem again...
epilepsy was a big one.
The problem again is the experts will say, well, how did ancient people know that the brain needed to be operated on? How could they look inside to see that there was a tumor or that there was something that needed to be relieved, like pressure, for example? Now, that does bring to mind some of the stories about the ancient Chinese doctors, like Huatuo, for example. And Huatuo was one of the famous medical practitioners from the Han Dynasty.
Mm.
And he's mentioned in like the classical Chinese, like they call them fantasy books, but they're based on history. But there was the warlord at the time, Cao Cao, and Cao Cao always complained of headaches. He would always get them, during his war campaigns and complain about them. And the short version of the story, and there's various versions of it, but Huatuo could see that there was a tumor in his brain and wanted to operate. But Cao Cao thought the warlord thought that he was an assassin and wanted to kill him, so he had him jailed. And later, Cao Cao, the warlord, died of a brain tumor. And if you look it up today, that's what people believe that's what he actually had. That's what was giving him the headaches.
But this guy was had some second sight or telepathic ability.
That's the argument. That all the highly esteemed doctors from ancient China that were mentioned in the ancient texts, they had the ability to see into the human body.
Mm.
So when the modern, Western framework looks at what ancient people did, they completely discount things like that, where perhaps ancient
human
people...
MRIs.
Yeah, perhaps ancient people had perceptions that we don't have today. And maybe that's why you'd see medical procedures like that. They knew precisely where to go. They knew precisely what to do because they could see into the human body.
Yeah,
Just one idea.
From a modern perspective, to suggest that, Neolithic people would have been performing any form of brain surgery or anything in that area is absurd. Like, absolutely absurd. But that's based on what we know and our interpretation of all we have left is fossil records.
Well, the other thing that they've found with these ancient trepanation skulls is that there's no other injuries.
In the skull?
No. It's like a perfectly clean operation. And it just raises a lot of questions of how they did it, like what instruments they used. Because you're right, like they are very precise ones, like especially this one up here. Look how precise that one looks. Like, what were they using? Some of the skulls, it's done multiple times, almost as if it's like a decoration. So why, if it's got to be more than a medical procedure, because like if you had one medical procedure to remove something, why would you need 5 more holes in your skull? And is it decoration? Well, this is where we get to individuals like Bart Hughes. She says, look, both the practice of trepanation and the artificial elongation of skulls have the same ultimate effect. They give the brain room to move. So in 1962, Bart Hughes, a Dutch medical student, who was denied his degree because of his cannabis advocacy, he theorized that man's state of consciousness was related to the volume of blood in the brain. He theorized that the upright stance of modern humans limited the flow of blood to the brain and consequently reduced the range of human consciousness. And there's a quote I got later on from Amanda Fielding, who I've got a video of her later. She was interviewed in Vice magazine, and she was on Joe Rogan's show recently talking about LSD. But she was asked by Vice, like, what's the main premise behind trepanation? And she explained it. Look, when a baby's born, the top of the skull is soft and flexible. First, the fontanelle, the soft area on top of the skull, closes. Then the skull bones close, which inhibits the full pulsation of the heartbeat. So it is denied its full expression in the brain, she says. That loss of pulse pressure results in a change of ratio between the two fluids in the brain, the blood and cerebral spinal fluid. It is blood, she says, that feeds the brain cells with what they need, such as glucose and oxygen. The cerebral spinal fluid removes some of the toxic molecules. She said trepanation works by restoring the full pulse pressure of the heartbeat. Then the capillaries slightly blow up and squeeze out an equal amount of the cerebral spinal fluid. When the circulation becomes sluggish, stagnant pools can build up, and this can contribute to the onset of diseases such as dementia and Alzheimer's. Now, she doesn't spell out there. She's being very conservative with the way she frames that. But you see that these guys believed that it was that extra blood flow to the brain and that extra circulation and everything to do with the pressure that re-enabled psychic abilities, that re-enabled some kind of higher consciousness. Now, let me play you a video here. I've got an old one. This is Bart Hughes. In 1965, this guy was the one that came up with this idea. He's like, human beings, because of the way we've evolved, we're not getting the right volume of brain to the skull, and we're not, all the pressure's wrong. It's like your consciousness in your brain has been all sealed up. And if we release some of that pressure, blood will go to the right places, and you'll just have all these incredible powers.
But to be honest with you, though, that doesn't make any medical sense at all.
Well, he didn't think so. And in Amsterdam in 1965, he got a little drill and he got someone to film it, and he drilled a freaking hole in his skull.
Are you going to show us this happening?
And if you're a little bit squeamish, you might want to skip ahead about it. It's only about a minute long, and it's not too full on. Like, it doesn't actually show insertion or anything, but here it is. Let's take a listen. So he says, to prevent the blood from running into my eyes, I put on glasses and taped everything closed over the bottom. I placed a large bandage going down my nose so that all the blood drips down the tip of my nose onto the ground. The drilling went like this, he said. The drill had a flexible shaft you can hold like this, and the drill went straight into the hole like this. He said, I mainly had the feeling where I was sitting using these muscles, and I had lost half a litre of blood and had taken that as the limit. I would stop after half a litre of blood loss so as not to run the risk of weakening myself a bit. So, crazy or genius?
Absolute moron. Half a litre of blood. So it's going to take him, 20 days, 21 days for him to get that back.
But look at how he's vibing afterwards. He's just vibing.
Is this just in the pursuit of getting a higher high? Is he just a drug addict?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's a cannabis advocate.
Yeah.
He's big into LSD, and you totally nailed it. The reason these guys did this is because they wanted to get high and they didn't want to come down. They wanted that higher consciousness to last forever. Now, this brings us to Joe Mellon, who met this guy, this Dutch guy in the 1960s, and he became instantly intrigued with his ideas. And after a couple of failed attempts, Mellon successfully trepanned himself in 1970. He wrote a book about this called Borehole, and I tried to find a copy. I just could not get this. It's very difficult to find.
Probably rightly so.
No, well, people everywhere are like, can you get me a copy of this? This sounds fascinating. People that have a copy say it's a really interesting story, but he mostly just waffles on about taking drugs in the 1960s. But I found a video of him online talking about the effects of the trepanation after he went through the procedure. Let's take a listen.
In 1970, after a few Bosch shots, which are described in my book Borehole, I trepanned myself. Originally, I used a hand trepann, which was a bit like a corkscrew, but with a ring of teeth at the bottom of the shaft.
Oh.
It was an awkward procedure, a bit like trying to uncork a bottle from inside it. And it was unsuccessful. Subsequently, I used an electric drill, and that was much easier. It was comparatively simple.
An electric drill?
Well, if you're sitting there with a rotary one in your hand, I imagine it would be a lot more difficult, obviously.
I hope he used a titanium tip or something.
Well, yeah.
In the flat, and after it had finished, I busied myself clearing up the mess, and I waited to see what would happen. Over the next 3 or 4 hours, the feeling I had was one of increasing lightness, literally as if a
That's
weight
blood
was being
loss.
lifted from my mind.
Having some
I began
orange
to
juice,
notice
bro.
it probably an hour after the operation ended, and then it grew stronger. I hadn't really known what to expect, and it was rather exhilarating, this gradual lightening.
You're dying,
It
mate.
It lasted till I went to sleep, and when I woke in the morning, it was still there. I hadn't come down. And in the days that followed, I realized that it was a permanent change in my consciousness that had taken place. I was in a better place, ready for anything. I always found that the worst part of coming down from a trip was the last part, when the old heaviness of the old adult routine set in again. Well, after trepanation, that's the part you don't have. You stay just above it. And I must say, it's well worth it. And I'm eternally grateful to Bart for having shown me the...
He says he's grateful to Bart for having shown him the wisdom to do it. So are you ready, Aaron? Is that convincing enough? Are you ready to drill a hole in your head to feel like a child again?
No, I mean, recently I have been exploring nostalgia, but I realized you can't go back. Like you can't, no matter what you do. And by drilling a hole in your skull so that you can not come down, like the problem is though, again, you still live in this society. Unfortunately, our society is geared towards instantaneous, responsive, sharp. That's why caffeine is such a big deal. It's like you think that you're going to drill a hole in your skull and then stay high all the time.
It is interesting, though, that everyone that's done it, and obviously they're biased because they've just drilled a hole in their head. They don't want to think it's for nothing. They all do say that it changes something. He believed that his increased awareness and altered level of consciousness were a direct consequence of the increased brain metabolism.
You know what? At the risk of offending probably trepanners that might be listening to this.
The trepanning groups.
Yeah, they're the worst. But let's just say that I remove like 500 mils of blood from you, Ben. I'm going to remove half a litre of blood from you. I guarantee you'll probably have a very similar feeling.
Yeah, but these guys say that feeling lasts for months afterwards, like years, until the hole is sealed over. Then it goes away.
So you're high for years on end?
Well, it's just an altered state of consciousness. It's not necessarily high. They just describe it as a different awareness.
But then a good question would be with this guy. It's like, well, what happens then if you've got a different level of awareness?
Well, let me describe what they say. So both Hugh Jess and Mellon describe similar benefits. They said the expanded consciousness brings the realization that love and health are greater than money or power. It transcends... Aaron's dead. Killed him. Dead of cringe. Died of cringe in the studio. Trepanned straight in the head with a cringe bullet.
Drilled in the back of my skull.
It lifts one above the petty level of blind faith and intolerance to a place where one sees that all we have in common, irrespective of language. So that makes me kind of want the opposite.
Yeah, so it's virtue signaling to the extreme. Oh, you're just all of a sudden you're more enlightened than the rest of us.
Like, I don't want more tolerance. I want less tolerance.
Oh.
Like I want you to put more skull on my skull. So I've got
I want a double skull.
I want to double my intolerance.
Yeah, the next time someone says, "Oh, you got a thick skull," I'm like, "Yes."
I want intolerance on steroids. Can you just give me 3 skull helmets? Just so I'm permanently intolerant.
Isn't it fascinating though? It's fascinating that obviously it's not the same thing, but if you look at it from a holistic perspective, you've got people that are drilling holes in their skull to essentially reveal their skull to the world, right? But then you've got other people on the other side that are wrapping their heads in tinfoil. Like, do you see the difference? It's like, it's a bit weird.
Yeah, other benefits they reported were, expanded consciousness, intensified awareness of sensory perceptions, increased efficiency in social operations, increase in cooperation and social harmony, less conflict and chaos, the restoration of creativity, and the comprehension of the bigger picture. So it does change you, according to them, but as time passed and Mellon's borehole began to seal over, he discovered it was reducing the benefits he was enjoying. And this may be why we saw earlier in those images of skulls why there's so many holes.
Oh.
Because eventually the trepanation is not a permanent thing. It's semi-permanent. And eventually you got to drill a new hole. So
in that image that you've actually put up on the screen there, in that central image, you can see that it appears like some of those holes have actually healed over.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Potentially.
Does the bone actually heal again?
What you would have, is it osteoblasts? Like you would have some attempt at recovery. I don't know if it'd be that much, but the body would attempt to heal itself.
So this raises some questions.
Well, when do we start?
Were human skulls modified in order to emulate abilities that other beings seem to naturally possess? This is what she's putting forward. Because again, there were elongated skulls that don't seem to be modified. They seem to be naturally like that. Were trepanation and skull elongation a mechanical means designed to bring about a higher or different level of consciousness and or psychic ability? See, all these guys that have done trepanation, they've just got normal skulls. What if they had bound cone heads and then they got trepanation?
Actually, that's a good question. So
They'll just be levitating pyramids in the air?
Yeah, so
floating giant blocks into place?
Are there elongated skulls that have trepanning injuries?
Well, there's one of them here. I mean, there's one of them on the screen.
Oh, that one there, yeah, okay.
There's one over here.
So yeah, like does that unlock a new level of enlightenment?
Yeah, that guy built the pyramids.
Yeah. He just floated them into place.
Place. And they didn't need any slaves. They just needed some big-brained,
sharp-toothed,
trepanned individuals. Were ancient civilizations purposely transforming themselves into superior beings, she asks. Well, is there any proof behind this, apart from conjecture of the people that did it to themselves? Well, Bart Hughes made many attempts to produce verifiable evidence, but she points out that the diagnostic tools in the 1960s weren't adequate to completely measure what was going on in the brain. But in 2005, the International Trepanation Advocacy Group, which was formed in 1997, they were finally able to show that, quote, blood flow enhancement attained by skull trepanation resembles the blood flow characteristics of youth. And on this basis, the reduced blood flow through the brain characteristic of middle age can be restored to a youthful level. This is just as Hughes had theorized back in 1965. So forget about your blood, boys. You want eternal youth, boom, hole in the head. Instant eternal youth. You'll start thinking and acting like a 20-year-old again.
I was a dickhead when I was a 20-year-old. I was probably one was a 30-year-old, so I'm not going to do that.
You're a dickhead now. Nothing's changed.
But not all the time. So a little, some things have changed.
It's dipping
a little
down.
bit. That's right, yeah. I've mellowed in my old age.
But when you were a 20-year-old, even if you were a dickhead, you felt great.
Yeah, I guess, but I just blame that on being a parent.
You're on top of the world when you're a 20-year-old. Despite this medical censure, though, a small group of individuals remain committed to researching the effects of the trepanation. So I must have cut off a bit there, but some people that have attempted this have wound up in prison, even for private individuals that are seeking it. The woman that founded this group, this advocacy group, what's her name again? Amanda Fielding. I saw a video of her later today, and she was saying that they've tried to do studies on this in Russia, and they just cannot get permission to do it. Even if the person is about to go through a trepanation procedure for something else.
Are you kidding me?
There's still policies against studying this. So there's a little bit of a pushback. It's
is there a suggestion that there's some conspiracy to?
No, it's just considered quackery.
Right.
And it's just one of those things where they keep saying, leave it to the medical professionals, leave it to the medical professionals.
Oh, and we know how accurate they are.
But this woman, Amanda Fielding, she was the one that was on Rogan recently, and she was the partner. I think they were married. She was married to Joe Mellon, the guy that I played earlier, who was giving he's the guy that wrote Borehole, that did it to himself after meeting the Dutch guy. She self-trepanned herself in the 1970s as well, and she released a documentary called Heartbeat in the Brain. Now, apparently this is lost footage. The original film, no one can find it anymore. There's no archive of it.
So how did you get it?
YouTube. Someone's uploaded some clip to YouTube.
Okay.
It's not the full film, and it is censored, so they've removed quite a bit. But I wanted to play this for you because it's just fascinating to see these people.
yeah, absolutely.
And watch them drill holes in their head. I mean, what else can I say? Let's take a look.
It is me looking rather anxious. The morning of the operation. Here's
Is the bird
Birdie.
going to do it?
That's her pet pigeon, by the way, and I've got a little clip about him later. Yep, there he is.
This is an old skull.
The pigeon performs the operation.
Yeah, I knew that was coming.
So she's got this skull on the screen. This is an old Irishman, and that's what she practiced on.
An Irishman, I believe, in his day, which I practiced drilling on. I decided to make the hole on the median line, just above the hairline. Here, I'm lifting the instrument out of the sterilizing fluid. This is the bath cap I wore to keep my hair out of the way.
She's got a modified bath cap with a gap for where she's going to drill. Now she's got these weird glasses on with the bath cap.
The dark glasses I wore to keep the blood from trickling into my eyes. I taped them to my forehead. They have the effect of depersonalizing me.
No.
Yeah, she's doing it.
With the flexible dry. I stopped drilling every now and then.
So they blur it out. You can't actually see the
You
drilling.
can see enough of what's going
Distilled
on.
water to cool it. There are 3 layers of bone to get through.
3 layers.
What one is doing in trepanation is removing a piece of bone from the skull. One is not entering the brain. The brain is soft like a pudding. The change was almost imperceptible, like the tide coming in. It was a feeling of elation and relaxation. Later in the evening, I noticed a silence in my head. Having cleaned up and had a bath, we went out and had a steak for supper to make up for the lost blood, and then went to a party we'd been asked to. All this took place in 1970. Now, 8 years later, I can say that the experience of it is as good, if not better, than I'd hoped.
Lady, you're cuddling a freaking pigeon.
The consequences of the operation, the regaining of the lost energy and buoyancy of childhood, are advantages which should be made available to everyone. Trepanation is the only way of permanently expanding consciousness.
I think it's a small price to pay to drill a hole in your head to feel youthful. Think about what people do today to their bodies to feel and appear youthful. Think about plastic surgery.
Mm-hmm.
Think about breast augmentation, all those changes people make to make themselves taller, change
Botox,
their
fillers.
faces. This is nothing. This is nothing compared to what people will put themselves through. So if it's true that she gets 8 years of feeling like a child again, you have to at least admit that it could be worth it. I'm not an advocate of drilling a hole in your head. It is. Don't do it at home.
The problem is, I think that there is just too many inherent dangers in something like this, especially from an infection control perspective. Is it worth it for 8 years of feeling like a child? And how much do you feel like a child? Like this boy, go for a
good
run,
question.
exercise.
And when you see an interview with her years later, it actually doesn't sound that impressive. She's not really selling it, when she's in her later years. Let's take a listen.
The subtleties of consciousness are so subtle and difficult to tie down. But my dream pattern changed after trepanation. It became much more relaxed. And what I find very compelling is I've had 3 partners, actually, who've been trepanned. And 2 of them I've known before they were trepanned and after. And both of those I've noticed after their trepanation a very subtle shift, a kind of relaxation, an internal relaxation, we all have our bag of neurotic symptoms. And I noticed this kind of little bit of a sinking of the neurotic symptoms and a little bit more energy. And what I think it is just there's a little bit more energy.
Not
How many times
really.
did she say subtle, a
Yeah.
little bit? Like, is it worth it?
Yeah, not really selling it in that clip, is she? Like the previous clip where she's just done it and she's about to make love to a pigeon. You kind of think, yeah, this could be for me. But when she's years down the track and she's had 3 husbands who have had holes in their head, like, is that what she puts on her Tinder profile?
You probably.
Like, you got to be over 6 feet,
Yeah.
you got to be earning $200K a year, and you got to have a hole in your head.
Yeah.
And you got to be a pigeon. And I'm not joking about that, by the way, which we'll get to.
Oh, no.
Which we'll get
No,
to.
I just saw the name of the file, which has got pigeon and love in it.
I mean, I know telepathy exists because I had this passionate love affair with a pigeon who I brought up from a baby. And he fixated and fell madly in love with me and I with him.
Okay, now maybe I'm reconsidering it again. Aaron's leaving. He's taken another bullet of cringe to the cranium. he's going. God, it wasn't that bad. It's nice. Draws the line at sex with a pigeon.
Oh,
so look,
no, back.
I admit that she's not selling it, but again, she doesn't have the elongated head.
So hang on a second. So you drill a hole in your skull, you then start screwing a pigeon that you think's having a relationship with, but none of that would have happened if she just simply had an elongated head.
Look, maybe there's a plastic surgeon in Korea who would be like, okay, I'll do both. I can elongate your head and I'll drill a hole in it.
Do you know
We've got pigeons here.
Do you know where the ethical problem comes in? It goes all the way back to what we're talking about at the start there. I don't think it's something as simple as finding a good Korean plastic surgeon and getting him to squish your skull. You've got to start before the fissures have sealed up. And then, so basically you've got to start with a child. And then that child has to, because the child can't give consent to do that. And then you've got to hope that the child, once they reach a certain age, is willing to engage in trepanning. I don't think this is the kind of thing that you can do after the fact. And so that's hence why they're not allowing people to do research into it.
And there are a couple of stories recently, well, not recently, in the last 5 years where doctors performing the procedure have gone to prison for doing it because it is illegal to do it. And probably little known is that this is how Chris Cuomo got his break, covering trepanation.
I thought you meant that he actually drilled a hole in his skull,
no,
which would make sense.
This is an old ABC report, which again is one of these ones where there was an original report which was so shocking it's gone. Like, it's not even in the archives anymore, where they showed the procedure and people were outraged. And then this report from Cuomo was a follow-up from their initial one. Let's take a listen.
Having holes drilled in their heads, a procedure called trepanation. Defies common sense, right? Well, after we broadcast our story, local law enforcement determined not only did it defy common sense, it was also against the law. This man, Peter Halverson, has become a guru of trepanation, telling people it will turbocharge their minds, even help eliminate mental illness. But now he's holed up in his home near Philadelphia, wanted in the state of Utah for practicing medicine without a license. Halverson's troubles began in January when he took a group of young people to get holes drilled in their skulls.
Sound good?
Do you know what, though? I mean, if you want to drill a hole in your skull, go right ahead. Like, I don't understand why people get upset about other people doing it. Like, obviously, we're joking and we're cringing out here about what's happening with this woman. But in all seriousness, if it's your body and you want to drill a hole in your skull, I mean, obviously, you can't do it to other people and you can't influence other people.
Then how would you do it then? If you can't do it to other people?
Well, I mean, you could have ways of people learning. I've got no.
So you got to do it. You're allowed to do it. The state allows you to do it, but you got to do it to yourself. Well, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
No, but why?
I get that it's the same argument of, well, psychedelics should be legal because how dare you regulate people's consciousness?
Yeah,
but
just don't drive a car.
It's a very dangerous procedure.
It is. It's a highly dangerous procedure.
If you screw it up, you're damaging your brain.
Yeah, and then they become this is the thing, right? Then they become a burden on the state. And then why not allow it to be done by proper professionals?
Yeah, the next thing you know, you've got a harem of pigeons in the park. And you're just off and you feel young again.
No, but you see, it's not something I would do. And there should be education campaigns about the dangers of it. But why are you stopping people from doing these things to themselves, really?
Because it's a crime.
Here, Halverson, dressed in red, together with an emergency medical technician, helped Heather Perry begin trepanation. Heather, who had come from England, said she hoped trepanation would cure her depression and give her more brain power. I witnessed the procedure. The hand tool, called a trepann, is used to bore a half
Oh, God, you can tell she's...
bone.
Oh.
Don't be fooled by the surgical masks. What I saw was messy and bloody.
Reviving an ancient practice that goes back thousands of years. People gathering in secret in the desert.
Let me skip ahead a
And the
bit.
sleepy desert town of Burl.
It seems scary to me that somebody try something like that. Real scary.
County prosecutor Scott Burns.
You can't drill holes in people's head unless you're a physician. And
I agree with
what he
that.
did was crime.
Wait, you just said you got to do it
No.
yourself. Now you're saying a physician can do it?
Well, that's not, why not though? Why not make it an
Trust
actual
the experts.
Well, an actual licensed physician that knows infection control. Like, why not? They let people, do a whole heap of things to their bodies.
Well,
what difference does it make?
That's what the guy went to prison for.
Well, no, he went to prison because he was doing it without a license. He obviously doesn't have a medical degree.
So if he had a medical degree,
If you understand the dangers and infection control and, how to avoid hitting, either, an artery or something, then I don't really have an issue with that. If people want to do that to their bodies, let them do it to their bodies.
I didn't save the clip, but Cuomo interviews that woman that traveled all the way from England towards the end. And the reason she got the procedure is
him a call now.
she was depressed. She wanted to remove her depression. I wish I saved the clip because at the end, she just looks like that picture of Ronald McDonald when he's just about McFucking had it. And she's just like, feel all right, I guess.
I just imagine that meme, except there's just blood coming down.
Yeah, she does. She's got a bandage with a bit of blood. And all she can say is, I feel a little bit better. I feel lighter.
No, but do you see what you do, right? And this is a really good example. And I don't agree with regulating things, but if you regulate this, you've got people that can come in and you sit down, you have a psychologist talk to them. Oh, you've got depression. Okay. Well, look, it's highly unlikely that drilling a hole in your skull is going to cure your depression. Have you tried other things first? Then go through that process. And then if you finally get to the point where someone really wants to do it, they really want to start, that telepathic conversation with a pigeon, go right ahead.
We need to make a meme of this woman up the top, just about McFucking had it.
McFucking trepanned it.
So going back to Lee Parkey's article, evidence suggests, she says, that we have the potential to evolve beyond the thinking animal and join the more enlightened civilizations of the universe. But as long as our skulls remain sealed tightly shut, our brains are unable to transcend their physical limitations. While some choose psychedelics to overcome this disability, the path to enlightenment could be as simple as a hole in the head.
It's not. It absolutely is not. Again, I'm like walking this line of where do whatever you want to your body, but then at the same time, it's not going to. And you know what as well? You know what all falls down, right? It all falls down with the idea that the human body responds and adapts to its environments. Like we have done this for hundreds of thousands of years. Mm-hmm. This is the reason why we've got things like vestigial organs such as the appendix. Like our body responds and adapts to the environment for the reasons that it has to. Obviously now, like appendix is a good example. We're now learning that may play a role in the immune system and immune responses and that kind of stuff. Whereas previously we've gone, it serves no purpose. No, our bodies adapt. So if this was something that was supposed to happen to humanity, like if we were supposed to have greater psi skills or something like that, well, then our body would have developed a way that by the time you hit 25 or something, that a part of your skull dissolves. So, like the body would have naturally found a way to do that. Not you go and drill a hole in your skull and you feel a bit better and then start making out with a pigeon.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm more inclined to say that human beings are a perfect creation of God.
Sure, yeah.
And drilling a hole to hack the human being is not some kind of shortcut to anything. And again, it's very stark with all of this kind of stuff. It's the same pitfall that you constantly see with anyone that's pursuing psi or some kind of gnosis through psychedelics.
We're back here again.
It always comes back to this, is they don't see the connection between the upright moral spiritual behavior and these so-called abilities of higher consciousness or psychic abilities. There is a direct connection. The people that report psychic abilities, historically, these supernormal powers, are the most holy, the most pious, the most ardent spiritual practitioners. And it's not through some hack. It's not through some clever trick that they unlocked these abilities. It's because they cultivated their hearts, they cultivated their morals, they cultivated their behaviors.
And made sacrifices. So it wasn't just for for getting high or partying with your friends or feeling like a kid again so you can spend more nights out.
Exactly. And they believed in God and they followed higher principles. And that's what can lead to what these guys are constantly searching for, this so-called higher consciousness. Ultimately, what they're trying to discover is truth. They're trying to perceive the truth of the universe.
Well, it's gnosis.
Yeah, they're trying to achieve gnosis. Yeah. And they keep trying with these shortcuts, whether
it is a shortcut.
Drugs or you change your consciousness with some electrode, or you literally drill a freaking hole in your head.
Yeah.
It's all a shortcut, and they completely completely miss the connection with traditional spiritual practices, which is the high moral principles and the belief in God. That's completely vanished from their equation.
Absolutely.
So they end up just having sex with pigeons.
Well, and what's happening is they're connecting with entities on the other side if they're using psychedelics that are telling them to do horrible things. And what do these entities normally do? These entities are normally associated with blood and gore and nastiness. And all of a sudden, these people are drilling holes in their skull.
Yeah, and it really does look like
the
a
blood
kind
again.
of evil ritual, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Like it is a blood ritual. You are just opening up your body and blood is everywhere.
And I'm really actually close to, I keep on saying I'm going to do it, but I probably never will. But I keep on thinking about writing a book on this, about how many times blood comes up in regards to paranormal. And I don't mean just like just a small subsection of paranormal phenomena. It is all through it. Like all through it, blood, the life force, is something that comes up that it seems like these entities are hell-bent on getting access to, using. And I'm like, there's a reason for this.
It's like, is this what you would see depicted in a statue in a church or a temple?
Today you would, but not
this woman with her bandaged head.
No, you wouldn't. You just wouldn't.
Yeah.
No. I mean, there's images, I suppose, of Jesus, for example, with, the thorns around his head. But that's not about
But that's him being persecuted.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
That's him being killed.
It's not him drilling a hole in his skull so that he can.
It's not by choice.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There's just, again, it feels like there's just something, apart from the obvious, that there's something off about drilling a hole in your skull. It seems like the motivations for it as well are rather selfish. Like, you know what? None of those videos did I hear any of them describing, it made me a better person so that I could contribute to society. It was just like, I got my high longer. Do you see the hedonism?
Well, there was love.
Well, that's hedonism as well.
They did experience more tolerance. So the book is, the article is from Lee Parkey.
Good stuff, Lee.
From New Dawn Special Issue. She's a really good writer.
Yeah, she is.
And I might link to a couple of her UFO articles in the show notes as well. But make sure you grab the new issue of New Dawn Special Issue Volume 18, number 2. It's a high strangeness special, which is right up our alley. And of course, there is that article from Bibu. That's one of our featured articles as well. So definitely worth picking up. newdawnmagazine.com. That's a wrap for this free edition of MU. Huge stuff coming up in the Plus extension.
The B-side of Bigfoot Encounters. The bees. We're going to be going into the forest poltergeist. We're going to be talking about Sasquatch mimics and a range of strange ghostly encounters that might actually explain why people are encountering Bigfoot in the forest. You'd never make that connection, but the way that Watson describes this, it might get you thinking in a different way without you drilling a hole in your skull.
Infrasound coming up?
No, infrasound is mentioned, but it's not really that relevant. It does come up in the book, but it's not infrasound. There's something else going on. And it comes down to essentially the witnesses themselves. So we'll get all into that in the Plus section coming up very soon.
All that's coming up on Mysterious
I need to go
Universe.
and find my drill.
You don't need it. I can do it with my fingernail. If you want a hole in your head, I'll just knock you out, do it with my fingernail.
I'll wake up like 3 hours later, there's a minor scratch there, and be like, are you done?
Just a big scab.
No, thanks.
Sign up today, mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up and you'll get access to the big extensions we do on these shows every single Friday. You also get an exclusive show every single Tuesday as well. You're getting more than double the content if you sign up for MU+. Plus members also get a higher quality audio version of the show, a totally ad-free version of the show, and of course you get access to our entire back catalogue if you're on our MU Max tier, going back 15 plus years of podcasts. And of course all our video is available. Our Plus versions of the video are available on the website as well. Again, check it out, mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up today. Help support your favourite show. That's a wrap for this free edition of MU. Thanks for listening. If you're on Plus, stick around for the great stuff after the break. For everyone else, we'll catch you next week.